The stories British-Goans carry with them rest today on this windswept island of Britain in the quiet of its red brick homes and endless lanes. But they didn't begin here. They began a long time ago in a place called Goa.
I was born in Goa in 1929. There was a school in my own house, so I was schooling there up to the 5th standard of the classes there, and then I went to boys' school. I remember when I was in the school, because the school was in my house, one of the teachers said, you wanted a library book, you have to pay 2 annas. And I asked my mother, can I have the book? She said, no, you can't have the book. And then I went to Arpora school where I did my matriculation. After that I went searching for a job. It was very difficult. So I wanted to go to Africa. Somehow somebody told me about it.
My mother said when she came down from India on the ship, she got married and came with my dad. And there were 8 girls on the ship who were going to East Africa to marry.
My father was born in Goa, and he left Goa in 1914. He was employed as recruited from Goa into the clerical service in Nairobi. So he travelled from there in 1914.
By the early 20th century, a migration of mainly Goan men in Zanzibar had led the way to Goan families settling along the newly built railway lines in Kenya, Uganda, and what was then known as Tanganyika.
Zanzibar town is just 1 mile diameter. It was a very small town, you knew everybody. There were a lot of Goans in Zanzibar. They all lived in the stone town. The predominant area. We lived in a place called Shangani. Many of them lived in Shangani. And just 2 minutes away across was this Portuguese street. There were some Goans there, I think. The Catholic church was there. We went to school from 7:30 to 12:30. In the afternoon, we were supposed to do our homework. I used to read a lot. And then at 4 o'clock, we always went out of the house. And we used to go to the Victoria Gardens. There's a big garden, we used to play there. There was a tennis court, there was a badminton court, and my parents used to come and play badminton there. My mother mostly. My father sometimes played tennis, and they used to come and play badminton.
We had our own house, which my dad and mum had built, a very palatial house. And it was on what was then called Fort Hall Road in Nairobi. Our next door neighbor was another Goan, Mr. Elder Cruz.
The area was it was Nairobi South, but that was before development, and it was bordering on the Athi Plains. So it was not unusual to get wild animals at night in the garden, so my father always had a gun.
In Dar es Salaam, it was a town center because it was not a big town. And the majority of Goans at the time were living in just outside the center. It's not very far, about 1/4 of a mile out from the center, 1/2 a mile from the center, which was known as Gerezani. There are a lot of our people were there.
Colonial East Africa was a complex society with myriad relationships in which Goans played a pivotal role. Though largely employed in the civil services, they were also privately engaged as doctors, teachers, and as banking clerks. They ran provision stores, pharmacies, and tailoring outfits.
My father had a tailoring business,
So he did that for many years. My father had lots of people working for him. So there used to be lots of Gujaratis, Ismailis, who were his regular customers, and the Goans, because by then there were quite a few Goan families settled there as well. But we also had people from the Africans who were, chiefs or whatever. They used to come for suits.
There were two cadres in the colonial service clerical side, who were cashiers, who were nearly all Goans. And there were district clerks, most of whom were Goans, especially in the remote areas. The Goans provided the whole of the clerical service for Kenya, both in the field, in the stations, and in Nairobi in the secretariat. We simply couldn't have operated without cashiers, and we'd spent our whole time trying to add up. So we relied on them on the money side exclusively.
The day-to-day work was very routine. They had things like an inward register of correspondence. All inward correspondence was recorded, and all outward correspondence similarly recorded. So you had to keep a note of everything, and note on which file that particular correspondence was, because in case the district commissioner wanted it, you went straight to the inward register and knew exactly where to find things. So you had to be accurate in your filing, and that's something I learned, because the first sort of thing I learned.
The Goans were a remarkable community. We trusted, I think it was a matter of trust. We trusted Goans in a way in which was quite unique. And they were very trustworthy people. They were incredibly loyal, totally honest. The number of Goans who in clerical service got into trouble for theft or cheating or anything was tiny. They were just nice people, and we got on them very well. They were Christian, they spoke good English, they were friendly, they had a good standard of living, they were Christian. We had a lot in common with the Goans.
And they were not really like the rest of the Indian community. They were like us, they were like civil servants. And we accepted them as such. Quite often there would be the odd Sikh who would play a similar role, but he was part of the Asian community. In a way, the Goans were quite separate, definitely separate. We looked at them as being separate. They were close colleagues, but we didn't live in each other's laps, and they seemed to be very contented with the education and the hospital provision and all the rest of it. They never complained. I don't think Goans ever complained. I can't remember a single grumble.
In a district office, you are in daily touch with the African.
I had a role of more of a supervisor, where I supervised the staff and checked that all the work was being done properly and everything was sorted out. In fact, they took more interest in learning what to do than the other lot who were the Goans were not interested. They always tried to undermine me.
We always had domestic help, but who were very loyal and very, stayed with us for years and years and almost accepted like a member of our family.
I personally think that we looked up to the whites, but when it came to the Africans, we didn't really treat them the way we should have. I think it's even worse in case of non-Goans. But I know lots of Goan families who really didn't treat the Africans, cooks, servants, ayahs or whatever, in the way they should really have treated them. I think it's something that happens even in Goa when you have a caste system in Goa. So they probably accepted that the white man was superior ruler or whatever, and the black man was under them.
We looked actually them as our servants. We did actually look. And thinking of it now, we never actually pay them well.
Like Europeans and other Asians, Goans formed social and sports clubs. These clubs, together with the Catholic churches, became the focal point of Goan society in East Africa.
Mombasa was very much a community town where people socialized within their own community. And we Goans, having the Goan Institute, tend to have all our parties and dances and debates all within the club. So our socializing was very much within the community. In Nairobi, there was more than one Goan club. So Mombasa would visit all the 3 different clubs. In the club, people who wanted to play billiards and snooker, there was all that available. There was a big reading room where all the papers would be there. British papers and, the local papers were all available at the club.
My father was a tailor. We had, in Kampala, we had the Goan Institute. But we also had a Tailors Institute. And people who were either tailors or children of tailors, butlers, cooks, or whatever, were not allowed to join Goan Institute. So I noticed that difference.
Goans contributed financially quite a lot to all the churches in Kenya. They were quite a mainstay of the churches in Kenya.
A growing African resentment developed in the 1950s into an anti-colonial movement called the Mau Mau, which captured widespread support in the highlands of Kenya.
The Kikuyu had retracted north from Kiambu into the heartlands of North Kiambu and Murang'a. And it, as soon as they began to recover, their numbers began to recover naturally. Anyway, better health services helped. And they suddenly realized that they'd missed out on a great deal and that a lot of their land, probably the most productive land, had gone. But then you've got all these Europeans who had a strong voice in Parliament.
The white settlers were very powerful in England. Many of them, they say, Kenya was the sort of workhouse of the British aristocracy, because many of them had big, big farms.
We had a domestic chap who worked for us called Stephen, and he had worked for us for about 8 or 9 years, and they were not allowed to have bank accounts. So my father, if we had somebody working for us, would open a bank account into which he would put money for them, whatever money they wanted put in. And they had gone on a holiday to Mombasa, my parents, leaving my 2 sisters and me in the house with Stephen. And one evening, Stephen came to my eldest sister and said, "I have to go." So my sister said, "Wait till they come back. They're only coming back next week." "No, I have to go now," he said. "I have to go today." And she said, "What should we do with your money? Because I can't draw it." So he said, "I'll come back for the money, but I have to go now." And the following day, we discovered that there had been a lot of attacks on people in their homes because they had recruited these people into the Mau Mau, and they were being instructed to attack their employers. So I suppose rather than do that to us, Stephen decided to go. The Africans resented the British who had colonized their country. Not so much, I think, the Asians.
The really salient point for us all was the fact that the French had been defeated in Vietnam totally, and then they were actually defeated again in Algeria, more politically than militarily. And this demonstrated that European colonies were not on. And the constant pressure from Washington and from New York too. And so colonies were got rid of.
on the very day that the revolution was to take place, the day before, they had a big party or big meeting, and the leading members of the Afro-Shirazi left the party early and went to Dar es Salaam. So they knew that the next day there would be people landing in Zanzibar to overthrow the government. That day, that was the 12th of January 1964, I can remember very early in the morning, the Goans particularly were going for mass, and there was a vehicle that came saying, "Go back to your homes, there's some problems going on," and we could hear some gunshots. And it so happened that the rebels, as what we used to call them at that time, were getting into the stone town and shooting indiscriminately. And there were some Goans that were killed, who were returning from church, and they were shot. So we stayed at home. We didn't get out for at least a couple of days.
Opotep was well qualified, shrewd, knew what he was doing. Perhaps he would have never done what President Amin did in 1972.
The coup took place that night. I was rung by an ex-Permanent Secretary for Internal Affairs, an Englishman called Mike Davies, who by then had retired but was appointed the principal of the School of Administration in Kampala. He rang me to say that there was a coup and that tanks were rolling in Kampala.
I was going to school, and there was a car parked on the road. And when I looked in, I saw a man with his head blown off. I still remember that. It's like as if it happened yesterday. It's so vivid. I just saw his head blown off. We couldn't believe. I mean, I certainly could not believe that we were being expelled. As far as I was concerned, I'm an African. I was born in Africa. There's nothing you could take. You could take £50 per family, or was it £100, whatever, and one bag. That was it. So I left everything behind except documents.
There was a little problem at the club, but one of them went and said, that we were being against the Africans. I was picked up late at night, actually. It was about around 7:30, 8 o'clock. But in the meantime, everybody was ringing up each other, saying, "Well, this thing is happening. So and so has been taken in. So and so." So we were all sort of tensed up, actually. So as we entered the prisons, everybody was all put in the cells. I think there were 10 or 15 in each cell, sort of thing. And as we were walking, everybody is talking there, all our Goans. I mean, we could hear them talking, Conretor, to find out if it's one of us or whatever. And we were all scared. He came and said, this is what you've been doing, and this, you've got 3 days to leave the country.
People running around with guns and shooting, and we never heard anything, or we never saw anything while we were indoors. But then we had to then drive back to Nakuru from Nairobi. I think it was the drive back was the scariest thing I've ever experienced, because it was me, my mum and dad, and my sister, and there were all these, as we're driving down, they were the road were lined with these men with guns. I think that possibly might have been a kick up the backside to my parents, because 5 years after that we left.
Initially we had the question of citizenship didn't really occur to us, but subsequently we realized that if you were to go on working in Kenya, for example, you had to be a citizen of that country, and we were not. And I also realized that even if I did take citizenship of the country, I wouldn't be accepted as a total citizen as such, because I was not local.
Everybody was really afraid that they were going to lose their jobs. What were we going to do? And that was when everybody started leaving and coming to England.
Same streets seem to walk. Same streets you always talk.
I missed the sun, and I couldn't believe when I was being driven through London that this was the great city we were all had read about in all the books. But it was quite a dreary, dull day. And after the sunshine of Mombasa, gosh, I felt, where have I come to? This is the London we were always dreaming of, and it was a very somber picture. And the houses, we had been used to big open spaces in Mombasa, and I saw these lines and lines of streets and streets of houses all the same.
The winter was soon upon us, and it was cold, so it was go to work and come home and sit down in the warm house. My first experience of snow was on Easter Sunday, believe it or not. We were about a foot deep in snow.
Because you couldn't get a house, a room. You couldn't get a room from the whites. They wouldn't give you a place. You could get a house with the Indians.
Know the thoughts that you think towards me, the thoughts of peace and not of evil. You sent your son to die for me.
In my time as when I was General Secretary, I recall that there were 1,200 members. There was a fair proportion. The functions were oversubscribed. We had no problems in filling up halls. So I remember attending functions at Portchester Town Hall, in Bayswater. In fact, there were a couple of functions in Alexandra Palace, which was sellouts. The Goan Association had its, or bought the clubhouse in 1983. It was in Beckenham in Kent. I'm sure it took a Herculean effort to bring the clubhouse to a standard which it could be used by the membership. And there were a lot of members who put, I believe, long hours to ensure that this work was completed.
To be my future and my home, Lord, you are faithful when
Life was wonderful when we came here. It was difficult, but it was wonderful, because in £5 we could pay our rent, we could do our shopping, and we had a great time.
I was just so glad that the British government stood by its principles and accepted them. And haven't they done a good job in this country? Oh my goodness me, I can't think of a better set of immigrants. It hardly took anything. I mean, 9 months or so, and they disappeared into the community, into work.
Cristo tocou a minha vida com suas amigas e santas mãos. Minhas feridas já não existem mais, pois este amigo vida nova me deu. Amigo maior, és tu, Jesus, amigo melhor, és tu, Jesus, em minha vida. Novo dia raiou, quando recebi como o sol da justiça que jamais